I'll start over because I forgot what I said.
Sorry.
The greatest problem that the labor movement, the political movement, and the entire progressive movement have. Sure. Is that better?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Is how to revive the working class struggle in the United States. This is the real problem that everybody faces, copes with every day, and very often gets overwhelmed by. In this regard, our party's efforts to build and promote workers' assemblies could potentially be an extremely important contribution to this effort. The first real workers' assembly of this period was the Southern Workers' Assembly, and it was largely the work of our allies, the Black Workers for Justice, and our comrades in North Carolina. And this assembly was largely based upon the unions, and as such, it has tremendous potential. Of course, such assemblies must also become magnets for the oppressed and the exploited outside the labor movement, the unorganized, the unemployed, and everybody who's oppressed by capitalism. And we must continue to try to get a balance between the political struggle and the economic struggle. But my topic for tonight is to examine the recent walkouts and demonstrations of low-wage workers that have caught everyone's attention, and to discuss the significance of these events. And I would like to start by reading about several of them, if you will indulge me. What I'm going to read comes mainly from publications. Now, people are familiar with the Our Walmart struggle, the opening Friday of last year, the demonstration in Bentonville, and so forth. But I want to read about some of the other walkouts. On November 29th in New York City, 200 workers carried out job actions at Burger King, Taco Bell, Wendy's, McDonald's, and other fast food restaurants. This was organized by Fast Food Forward, which is supported by SEIU, and in New York by Local 32BJ. One worker who participated, Raymond Lopez, an aspiring actor who worked at McDonald's for 2.5 years, was quoted as saying, quote, "In this job, having a union would really be a dream come true. At $8.75 an hour, you're really living in poverty." In Chicago in April, hundreds of fast food workers and retail workers walked out from McDonald's, Subway, Macy's, Sears, Victoria's Secret, and others, demanding a wage floor of $15 an hour and the right to organize a union without retaliation. Quote, "I think I'm doing more than I should for $8.25 an hour," says Esli Hernandez, a striking Dunkin' Donuts worker in Chicago. "They don't even appreciate the work that I do. They don't even say thank you. They treat you like a robot." Hernandez, who has a 4-year-old son with anemia, said he sometimes is forced to choose between buying medically recommended nutrition for his son or paying his electric bill. It's conditions like these that have led some people to call the U.S. economy the McJobs economy. In May in Detroit, as many as 400 workers walked out at 60 fast food restaurants in the Detroit metro area. The strike shut down multiple establishments, including a McDonald's, Long John Silver's, Burger King, and 2 Popeyes, and a KFC. McDonald's management called in replacement workers, but they joined the picket line. The $15 an hour campaign, as well as unionization, were the demands. It is important to note that there are 50,000 plus fast food employees in the Detroit metro area, double the number of auto workers. And these 50,000 workers, if they worked 40 hours a week, would make $15,000 a year, which is poverty level. But most of them work 15 to 20 hours a week and have to find work elsewhere. In St. Louis, in May, over 100 workers from 30 establishments, including McDonald's, Jimmy John's, Wendy's, and Domino's, walked out with the backing of the SEIU, the Teamsters, AFSCME, UFCW, and the AFL-CIO. And that was also a $15 an hour union right campaign, which also includes the slogan, "Can't survive on $7.35, which is the minimum wage in Missouri. In Milwaukee, McDonald's, TJ Maxx, and other companies were hit by walkouts demanding the $15 an hour and unionization. Kenny Mack, a maintenance worker at McDonald's, making $10 an hour, who has an 18-month-old daughter, had to move back in with his mother because he couldn't afford his rent. And in Milwaukee, the workers set up an ongoing committee in order to form their own union. Between 100 and 400 workers in Seattle forced the closing of the Taco Bell and had stoppages at McDonald's, Chipotle, Subway, Burger King. The action was called by Good Jobs Seattle. Now, this list does not include much more organizing that's really going on of low-wage workers that's being carried out all around the country by Unite Here, by the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Workers Union, by SEIU, and other unions at airports, in malls, in universities, hotels, cafeterias, and wherever there are low-wage workers. And these organizational drives are in progress, and many young people are gravitating to them in order to participate. And it's a part of a new kind of spirit. There was a sit-down, the first sit-down by workers in Las Vegas who sat in at the Strip for the first time in 20 years. That's a big deal. There's a lot of significance for the Las Vegas workers, the casino workers, when they sit into the Strip. Workers worked out at Giant Stadium in San Francisco. And such examples could be multiplied. Now, these examples should not be taken to mean that there is a great strike wave, or that anyone thinks that Walmart, with its 4,000 plus stores and its 1.2 million workers, or McDonald's, with 14,000 stores and 500,000 workers, are going to be organized by these methods. The reason to bring it up is that it is symptomatic of a new willingness of low-wage workers to take great risks, and that is the beginning of a natural response to this terrible exploitation that the multinational low-wage working class of the multinational low-wage working class that has been created by the scientific technological revolution and the low-wage stage of capitalist imperialism. It is a reminder to every working class organization to pay close attention. And these workers are the embodiment of the multinational, low-paid working class that Sam Marcy anticipated in 1985 when he wrote his classic work, High-Tech, Low-Pay. Now, each new stage of capitalist development does bring about unprecedented conditions for the workers. This is inevitable, because capitalism continually revolutionizes itself. From the earliest stage of simple cooperation, to the manufacturing stage, to the industrial stage, to the mass production stage, and now the high-tech stage. And at each new stage, there is posed new and at first overwhelming problems for the working class as it tries to adjust to the new conditions of exploitation. To get a little historical perspective, the previous phase of mass production, or Fordism as it is sometimes called because of the assembly line, first introduced by Henry Ford around 1912 or 13, destroyed innumerable skilled jobs and subjugated the workers to the assembly line. Having no industrial unions, they were subject to arbitrary speed-up, brutal authority of supervisors, dismissal at will, and this continued for 25 years. When the workers tried to organize in steel, meatpacking, and the rubber, Their union drives were smashed because of unemployment and because of a politically reactionary climate which allowed the bosses to win. But as the industry grew, mass production grew, and the semi-skilled industrial working class grew, and eventually overcame the problems of organizing union with mass strikes, sit-downs, and municipal general strikes. Much of the detail concerning this era, and much of what I'm about to talk about, is written in the book Low Wage Capitalism, and so I cannot go any further into detail. I recommend that you read that book carefully, and not because I wrote it, but because of what's in it. Now we have entered the high-tech, low-pay stage, as Sam Marcy called it. It is important to say that the working class in the U.S. was in a slowly developing crisis before the economic and financial collapse of 2008-2009. This collapse only accelerated and sharpened the crisis of the masses. The bosses set up a worldwide wage competition, pitting workers against one another from all over the world, and pitting workers in the U.S. against each other. Workers in Detroit had to compete with workers in Mexico and China, as well as auto workers in the non-union right-to-work South, where the plants ran to get bigger profits. Much work was put into the prison industrial complex, in which furniture workers, ticket booking agents, and many other occupations had to compete with near-slave prison labor. Of course, there was the wholesale immigration of undocumented workers allowed to pour through the borders and set up a competition with workers in the United States. The technological downsizing and offshoring of manufacturing allowed the capitalists to go from a high-wage manufacturing economy to a low-wage service economy, which at the present time is heavily black, Latino, Asian, and immigrant, with women at the lower end of the pay scale. Wages in the U.S. have been declining since 1979. The single earner family is ancient history, except for the rich and the upper middle class. Now, how do we approach this situation as Marxists? First, we have to go back to fundamentals. We must remind ourselves of our fundamental task and the task of the working class and the oppressed. Actually, much of the working class is the oppressed. It has been the historic task of the workers to emancipate itself, the working class to emancipate itself, and in the process to destroy capitalism and liberate all society. The working class in capitalist society is a revolutionary class because it makes everything. It creates all wealth. Nothing goes without the working class. And it is deeply interconnected, that is to say, socialized, by the interconnected processes of capitalist production, distribution, and services. It is in a supremely strategic position to take over all of society and expropriate the exploiters and the oppressing capitalists. The very process of class exploitation and oppression will drive it inevitably towards resistance. We must never forget that, no matter how the situation looks at any given moment. Having said that, we must look reality in the face and not deceive ourselves or the workers. Right now, the workers as a whole have not even reached the stage of defensive struggle, except in a few outstanding instances, such as the Republic Windows and Doors workers who seized their factories in Chicago, or the Wisconsin workers and students who occupied the Capitol in Madison for 2 weeks, or the Chicago Teachers Union, which organized a truly mass struggle. These are examples. There are probably others. This is not meant to be exhaustive. But the class as a whole has not done this. By and large, the workers have taken blow after blow and have been unable to mount an effective defense. The next stage of the struggle must be to organize a militant defense. And this really means for the working class in the United States to advance itself as a class. To go beyond being privately angry and pissed off, privately fed up and disgusted, and move towards class consciousness and struggle. In the evolution of the working class, within capitalist society, and especially within the big capitalist countries, the struggle to organize into unions and defend itself against direct exploitation on the job is what Marx called an inevitable and necessary stage. Lenin, the architect of the Bolshevik Revolution, said that organization was the only real weapon that the working class had. The struggle to revive itself as a class can have a strong political component, which could strengthen its effort and force the capitalist establishment back. But the working class needs the taste of combat, of class combat, of using its own ingenuity and its solidarity and its aggressive nature to fight the bosses and to win, to limit their exploitation. This is the fundamental thing that will give them the confidence as a class and help them to move forward onto the offensive. The class struggle is war, just like revolution is war. Organizing the workplace, however it comes about, not necessarily shop by shop, but perhaps by hundreds and thousands of shops that get swept by the tide of a class-wide struggle, as happened in the 30s. Right now, this road to the working class development seems to be blocked. It seems to be blocked by the decentralization of large numbers of workers out of the factories into retail stores, services of all kinds. It seems to be blocked by the extraordinary wealth and power of the ruling class, whose concentration of wealth grows with each quarterly report. Indeed, the difficulties of combating the present crisis situation of the workers are monumental. Even under the best of conditions, the challenges are formidable, and no one should underestimate them. The union leadership is overwhelmed by the conditions I just described. They want to do something about it. The low-wage workers' demonstrations, backed by SEIU and UFCW, and the call by Richard Trumka for an open conference in September in Los Angeles to brainstorm over what to do are symptoms that the problem of the high-tech, low-pay era are beginning to penetrate the consciousness of the labor leadership. They say they want to turn toward the community and immigrants, and that is highly progressive, at least on paper, and it remains to be seen how it is to be implemented. But as Marxists, we must approach the issue much more firmly than just throwing up our hands and saying that we don't have the answers and asking for advice. Lifting morale and shifting the perspective is a major part of the problem. The capitalist press never tires of talking about how the labor movement has shrunk from 35% down to 11%. They love to demoralize us and to dwell on the weakness of the movement, alleged weakness. But we should point out that before the greatest leap forward in the history of the working class in the United States, the labor movement had shrunk from 20% of the workforce in 1920 to 10% in 1930, and it went down from there till 1931 or 32. That did not prevent the great upsurge when the time came and the workers were ready. The real weakness of the labor movement today does not lie in numbers alone, nor does it lie in the strength of the ruling class or its technology, its vast wealth, or its repressive apparatus. The strength of the ruling class lies fundamentally in the ideological domination over the workers and all of society, and in the historic retreat of the labor leadership over a period of 30 years, and its inability to muster the vast potential of the strategic class in society, the working class, which they're supposed to represent. Of course, the bourgeoisie looks unconquerable when the antagonistic class, the exploited class, has not stood up. The labor leaders say they do not know what to do. But the working class knew what to do when the windows and doors workers took over the factory. They sent messages of solidarity and supplies from all over the country, in fact, around the world. But this solidarity was never mobilized on behalf of the struggle by the leaders who could have done it. When the workers and students of Wisconsin occupied the Capitol in Madison, someone in the leadership whispered, "General Strike." The idea instantly caught on, but just as soon as it was put forward, it was withdrawn in favor of an election. The Chicago teachers knew what to do when they organized the community, the students, and local union support against school closings, standardized testings, merit pay, and privatization, and so on. But when the crunch came, they were left on their own as the city shut down 59 schools, mainly in black and Latin communities. The leaders used the alleged weakness of the unions as a shield to justify their own timidity. But we don't look at 11% and get paralyzed. We look at the 15 million strong labor force that can be mobilized to support the class struggle. Look at it that way. Including especially the low-wage workers who dare to come off the job to protest. We look at the hundreds of millions of dollars in workers' dues that can be redeployed from the coffers of the Democratic Party and directed to carrying out organizing drives and other struggles, both within the labor movement and in the community. We look at the tens of thousands of union volunteers who pound on doors at election time, and we can visualize them as volunteers in the living class struggle, wherever they are needed. We must have ultimate faith in our class and see a path to the revival of the movement. Of course, we must also confront the present problems of the labor movement and the workers' movement in general, and look reality in the eye. Even if we cannot immediately solve the problems, the road to the solution lies in first stating the problems, clearly and truthfully. First of all, the configuration of the labor movement and its organizational reflexes at the top of territoriality and inter-union competition are absolutely unsuitable to launch the kind of class-wide struggle that is necessary to do battle in the period of high-tech globalization. 55 different unions, not even linked in collaboration. It's like the European model. This is archaic. The AFL-CIO is at most a lobbying, public relations, and research organization, in which each union is largely autonomous and free to do as it pleases and pursue the interests of its members as they see it, without regard to the needs of the union movement as a whole or the class struggle as a whole. It must be either reconfigured or the present configuration must be infused and adapted to the spirit of collaboration, unity, and solidarity in the class struggle. Second, in the spirit of Karl Marx, as elaborated to the First International in 1866, as was brought up here about a month ago by Larry Holmes, the labor movement cannot progress until it represents the interests and struggles of the unorganized, all the oppressed, organizing the South, defending immigrants, fighting racism, police brutality, stop and frisk, deportations, defending women's rights on and off the job, LGBTQ rights, and opposing imperialist wars, and so forth. Now, this may be a maximum program, but it is the direction the labor movement must go in if it is to succeed. And this means a lot more than just reaching out. This means getting into the living struggle on a daily basis and giving hands-on support to those who are in battle. Third, so long as the workers are hampered in their actions, in their ability to carry out broad struggles by repressive labor legislation, their hands are tied. And as long as the labor movement tries to restrict its activities to within the narrow framework allowed by the Taft-Hartley law, which was originally branded as the slave labor law, the then class solidarity cannot be carried out in a meaningful way. For example, if workers in a fancy steakhouse someplace over here on Lexington Avenue cannot set up a picket line outside the supplier of the steaks because it's a secondary boycott, they are immeasurably weakened. If the Teamsters cannot decide to support a strike by textile workers and walk out in solidarity because it's a secondary boycott, then the working class can never unleash its potential and exercise its power as a class. This does not mean waiting until some political campaign gets a capitalist politicians in a legislature to take up repeal. Although, for propaganda purposes, this would be very helpful and progressive if it could be done. But it means at least going past the law and doing what is necessary, and being prepared to escalate the struggle against the inevitable retaliatory measures that come in the wake of a Taft-Hartley injunction. And finally, Sam Marcy, the chairman of our party and founder of our party, stated the overall problem as succinctly as can be done. He noted that as long as the labor movement confines itself to operating within the limitations, the limited framework set by the capitalists themselves, that is, being competitive, respecting the sanctity of private property, talking about common cause between labor and capital, etc., 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 it cannot do anything but retreat. Breaking out of the capitalist framework is fundamental to the future of the class struggle. These are just some of the issues facing the labor movement that communists need to consider and to strategize about. Even if the party is not in a position right now to take many concrete steps towards solving these problems, it is necessary to discuss them and other lesser problems that I have not been able to bring up. Perhaps workers' assemblies can be an invaluable contribution to the revival of the struggle. Workers' assemblies, particularly if they have a strong component of the militant organized working class, can help launch political offensives against the establishment on behalf of the general masses. For example, the $15 an hour minimum wage, it's spreading. It could become like the 8-hour day. It could become like the 8-hour day that spread in the 80s and the 90s. We shouldn't underestimate that. Or the right to join a union, to enshrine that in legislation by struggle, mass struggle, organized by our workers' assemblies. That can play a big role. But there's another role. Workers' assemblies can intervene politically in the labor movement. They can take the message and under the influence of our party and its allies become a significant vehicle for a strong class, putting forward a strong class struggle line into the labor movement, including fighting for the cause of the millions and millions of low-wage workers who are being left desperate at the mercy of the bosses. Maybe even we can have our workers' assembly before the Los Angeles conference and formulate a program, and the workers' assembly could come to Los Angeles with a program and a line that's understood by every worker over there and make a political impact and begin that way for the party to have an influence in the labor movement through our workers' assemblies. Finally, I'll say this. The great strength of the bourgeoisie over the workers is that they have kept communists out of the labor movement. They have kept parties out. That's been their mantra. That's how Samuel Gompers got to be the king of the labor movement, by keeping the communists out of the labor movement. That's how they witch hunted us after World War I and executed Sacco and Vanzetti. And that's how they witch hunted the communists out after World War II, the communists who helped to build the CIO, because they don't want communists in the labor movement. But you know, Sam Marshall used to say, if they kick us out the door, we come in the window. If they kick us out the window, we come down the chimney. But we get there. Now, we may not be able to get there so quick, but we have to remember this. That's our destiny, is to help the workers organize themselves so that they can emancipate themselves. Down with the bourgeoisie, up with the working class, build the workers' assemblies, long live workers' world.